Marcos Manoel, who was the legitimate royal.
Well, it does make sense because, as we know, we're told a version of history. And when we look at history properly, none of it makes sense, but all we have to look at is who benefits. Hidden King of England, where can we get the book?
The Hidden King of England, you can get it from thehiddenkingofengland.com, greghallett.com, theworldoftruth.net. They're hardcover, yellow ribbon, really high quality paper, really high quality print, 700 colour photos with no bleed through, so we really had to go for basically the same printers that print money. So they're not cheap.
Gregg Hallett, welcome to Windows on the World.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, as part of the Hidden King of England series, we're going to talk about something central to this assumption of kingship, which is very much what your books, this series, this anthology is about. So can you expand on this idea of the two Jesuses?
Yeah, sure. Well, here's the Hidden King of England series box set, 5 volumes and possibly a 6th. And here's the 5th book here. Now, what royalty assumes in its license to be royal is that it is descended from Jesus. And the Catholic Church proposes that there is one Jesus who died on the cross. However, the Catholic Church acknowledges that its best kept secret is that there were two Jesuses.
Okay, so how did you find this out?
Basically by tapping into the high orders.
Okay, so expand on that a bit, Greg.
Portugal is known as the Second Jerusalem, and it's known as the Second Jerusalem by rabbis, etc. There were two Jesuses. One went to England, and there's a lot of mythology about Jesus in England. The other Jesus, whether it can be considered the first Jesus or the second Jesus, went to the Algarve, which is the lower state kingdom of Portugal, and it used to be known as the Kingdom of Portugal and the Kingdom of the Algarve. And the Algarve is a very likely place to go because it is west of the Rock of Gibraltar, and it is just outside the Mediterranean. And where Jesus lived and died in the Algarve, he was 22 kilometers west of the border between Portugal and Spain, and about the same distance, maybe he was 80 kilometers away from the last Roman outpost, so he's just outside the Roman Empire.
Yes, and Portugal is extremely important, so can you just expand on that as well?
Oh, well, Portugal's a Templar nation. It was created as a Templar nation. But perhaps we, in confirming the two Jesuses, maybe we should go back to Queen Victoria's research. In her day, she spent £1 million researching her lineage back to Jesus, and what they found out was that there were two Jesuses and they were third cousins. They were actually second cousins, meaning they had the same great grandparents, at least two of them, but they were one generation removed, and that's called third cousin. And it appears to be that the two Jesuses worked together, and they worked together with the Marys. And it appears that the Jesuses and the Marys also married or had companionship and had children together and had a lineage. And they must have had a lineage because that's considered the royal families of England and Europe to this day. That's their claim. So what I did was find out where the Jesuses lived, what they did, how they died, where they were buried, where their bodies were moved to, and why, and who cited them, and when.
It's a very extensive book you've got here, this book 5, and it's very, very complex. So
I haven't wasted any words because we actually knew what we were talking about. And rather than quote people, I actually went to the sites and lived there and experience the environment. So I could go to the site and I could also see the approach and I could see the view and I could pick up the local knowledge. Like Jesus in the Algarve, he had a pilgrim's way walking from his place to the next major town. It was called Pilgrim's Way.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Now, you've spent several years in Portugal researching this. So, this Merovingian bloodline you're saying, which is what they claim ownership of, which goes back to David, is what you were looking into.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, I took it from Jesus' life and purported death and his escape to where he lived, and then how that influenced the writings in the Bible. So Jesus was known as a carpenter, but he was actually an architect priest, and he built in stone, and he built in stone such that if there was an earthquake, there would be enough knowledge left behind in the foundations to reveal that he lived there and the distance to where he would then be reburied. So he predicted his next burial site as well in the dimensions of his buildings.
Yes.
And that was done by, in his original temple that he built was a water temple, and water temples were very rare. And Jesus of the Algarve was a master architect. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he built 3 layers of water coming in with his temple in the back in a vesica Pisces shape. And if you get the size of his temple and the size of his vesica Pisces, and the number for vesica Pisces is 1224, and you multiply that by 40, you get the distance to his next burial site, like within a few meters. You know, it was like absolutely fantastic. And it was due to earthquakes that his body was moved. And where his body was moved to, which was in Silves, I went to the Silves Easter Friday celebration. And the entire way that they celebrate Easter Friday is almost a reenactment of how Jesus was buried in the Algarve further east from AD 87 to the spring of 1150.
Okay, Greg, so expand on that a bit.
So what I'm saying is that dimensions were dates, and it was the same with Jesus of England. Dimensions were dates, and dates were dimensions. In England, with the markers that marked where Jesus was buried, if something was moved 12.5 miles away, it was moved back 125 years later. So the distance is codification for the years. You understand what I'm saying?
Not quite. Can you kind of simplify it for the viewers?
They used codification in foundations and in dates. And that
yes, you're talking about the sacred geometric aspect of it.
That was done so that once you had cracked the code, there was no denying it. It was just so obvious. And it was done in such a way that you could not remove the evidence, because the evidence was in distance and in time. And if you wanted to remove the distance, you'd have to move 1 or 2 objects. And if you wanted to remove the time, you'd have to fake the record. So what they did was just record dates and make no connection between them. And the distances were unaltered. So there was codification for a solid record. And Jesus' missing years from age 12 to 30 and his time studying in Egypt and the Egyptian mysteries, that's codified by Jesus in the Algarve and Jesus of England. They both codify that undeniably, even the names.
Okay, so
the details is like, I make one point and it's like, half a page of text with dates, etc., and drawings. But Jesus of the Algarve modelled the entrance to his villa and temple on Luxor, which he would have sailed past on his way to the first cataract of the Nile, Aswan, and the Philae Temple where he studied. And it was from there they have the first cataract, which is a floodgate, and from floodgate you get Fleet Gate, Fleet Street, and Ludgate. Floodgate, Ludgate
Okay.
Circus. Yeah.
You're saying it's directly related to the city of London.
As well, because as Jesus lived, died, and is buried in London, and there's a Jesus who lived in the Algarve, and the Jesus in the Algarve may have also married a French princess, like the daughter of a king, and he may have been the King of France, although I haven't been able to find any solid evidence on that, but there is a huge amount of allusion to it, and that allusion actually comes through the battle for the prime meridian between Paris and London London won in 1884.
So how does this story of Charlemagne fit in? Have you any idea about that?
A little bit, but that's volume 3, so it's a different thing. It's a different aspect. Another way they codified things was through sister cities. That would give you a clue. And also studying the ancient maps, the geography of England was completely different. Like the whole southeast coast of England, south of Medway, was an island. At least an island, and then it was a tidal island, and then it silted up. And they dammed up the Medway around 1950, and even 9 years after that it was still flooding over the dam and up to a place called Godstone. And Godstone was where the high tide mark was. And the whole of the southeast coast of England was called Regni, which was a place for exilarchs. So the Romans would get the exiled kings and queens and ship them to the southeast coast of England to Regni. And when Jesus of England arrived in Regni, he was made king of Regni because his reputation preceded him, i.e. he was killed on the cross. Didn't happen.
Okay, so you're saying that that was a symbolic thing, and that was really brought in by the Catholic Church. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there was a big switch in knowledge in 451 AD, where the Catholic Church broke away from the Coptic Church, and that formed two holy sees, the Holy See of Rome and the Holy See of Alexandria. And not many people seem to know that there's two holy sees. And the Holy See of Alexandria followed the work of Saint Mark, or Saint John Mark, and the Holy See of Rome followed the work of Saint Peter. And in the same year, 451 AD, the Catholic Church sent the Saxon army into England to destroy all evidence of Jesus in England.
That would make sense, because later on we had Henry VIII, who seemed to be destroying and taking away the power of the Catholic Church, but was also working with them, and they seemed to gain more power during his reign. That was obviously a lot later, but kind of makes sense.
Henry VIII, in exchange for being allowed to divorce, etc., allowed the Catholic Church to underwrite all the land titles in England.
Well, all as I know is that the poor laws were massively extended during the time of Henry VIII, and also the Vatican appeared to take more control. And I've actually talked about this with historians, and they say that does make sense, because even though Britain was meant to become Protestant, it actually really became Catholic. And this is, I think, the crux to a lot of what you're talking about.
Well, a lot of the battles in England, including the plagues, and the Great Fire of London and the Bishops' Wars, etc., they were actually attacks from the Templars, who were based at New Temple, the Temple in the centre of London, which was about 450 yards west of the walled city of London. And London was a commune. Literally, it was a commune, a walled commune. and it was also an island on a lake, hence Avalon. And the Templars were actually supporting and attacking the kingship because the agreement was to put a new king on the throne, etc., to change the religion to the true religion of England as it was designated, which was not Anglican and not Catholic. And the true religion was the Society of Ormus. And the Society of Ormus was an amalgamation of the teachings of St. John Mark before the Catholic Church broke away in 451 AD. And that teaching, the Society of Ormus, was the teachings of the Babylon mysteries, and the Egyptian mysteries. And it has a lot of alchemy to it. And a very simple example of alchemy is Camelot. And this is the way that things are remembered. Camelot is well known as King Arthur's kingdom. But Camelot actually means curved light. And if you get, say, the signet ring, which we've got on the cover of the books, the signet ring here, that's the signet ring of the Holy Roman Emperor Germanic. And when you hold it up into the light, you get different colours. So that's another colour straight off the light, straight off the signet ring of the Holy Roman Emperor Germanic. So is this, so is this, and so is this. And same on the back cover. So that the change in light from the same object is fascinating. And that's curved light, which is Camelot, right? Which can give a completely different appearance. So what happened was that the myths and legends that we've been taught, like Prince Arthur, etc., King Arthur, are taught to us so that when the truth comes out, we will recognize the story without actually knowing the details. Right? So myths and legends were a way of preserving history.
Well, that's absolutely right. And also this idea of the ormus, can mean gold or serpent. It's originally a Scandinavian name, but obviously you're saying it goes back further than that.
It goes back right back to Babylon. So I'm saying it's spelled O-R-M-U-S, Society of Ormus. And that was what St. Mark was into and what Jesus was into at the time in studying the Egyptian and Babylonian mysteries and the Temple of Philae. Yeah, and it's not, religion's not about words, it's about energy, So
yes,
all we've been given is words, but it's actually about energy. And unless there's energy attached to it, it's not spiritual, it's just mantra and repeaters.
Well, that's very interesting because my family name originally was Orms, and I was told by a fellow Orm that the Orm were crowning, at one point, they allegedly crowning the British kings for Scotland when Scotland and Britain were talking, England were talking. It's a very interesting story, that. So this Orm, it goes back a very long way, even in British history.
It does, and to prove that it's to do with energy, the Ormic state of matter is known as the fifth state of matter. So that's when you change it from its standard state into some more subtle vibration. Right?
Yes, it's about transformation, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also about a whole lot of things. It's about anti-gravity. It's about how insects that are impossible to fly have, say, a concave molecular structure, which actually gives them an anti-gravity element, for instance. And it's about using copper and changing it to its ormic state, and then it having medicinal properties. And it's about shapes also having an ormic state that can give off energy, beneficial healing energy, etc.
Yeah, so we're talking about really a universal force that's there, that's inherent, and has been used and captured within this word. So how does that tie in with the Hidden King of England?
I'll do an intro. So it's thehiddenkingofengland.com and gregghallett.com and theworldoftruth.net. It's 5 volumes. It's called The Hidden King of England, Armor Christi Unveiling the Rose. It's 1,200 pages, 700 colour photographs, and volume 5 has photographs of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is known as the solar chalice of the legislators Akhenaten and Jesus. So it continues the lineage from Pharaoh Akhenaten to Jesus, and from Akhenaten we get Aton Attention. Because I'm blending Jesus of England and Jesus of the Algarve, and they work together, right? So in terms of the energy, the high state of energy that they changed through their mysteries, is that the Jesus and Marys were working together with the Metatron. And my view is that there were up to 6 Jesus and Marys working together. That is 2 Jesus and 4 Marys, for example. And the reason I say that is when you look at the Metatron, which is 2 pyramids stuck through each other, which is the most stable form known, there are 6 perfect crosses in the Metatron.
Yeah, we're going into this sacred geometry area here, so maybe you better expand on that a bit, Greg.
The sacred geometry was absolutely prolific in Jesus of the Algarve's temple, which was also based on Luxor temple, and it was one of the first water temples, and it was a rectangle with a Vesica Pisces on the back, and it was surrounded in fish mosaics, and it was one of the few water temples. In fact, they're only just discovering the notion now that there could have been water temples, and what I've done is discovered a water temple which turned out to be Jesus' home, found it to be covered in fish mosaics, and found it to be full of sacred geometry, and also found it to be the source of Freemasonry initiations.
Well, it's very interesting this, because this hexagon and the actual design of this Metatron's cube is extremely Freemasonic, obviously. It also includes Israel, but Israel is included.
But hang on a minute, you're talking about a 2-dimensional version. I'm talking about a 3-dimensional moving version, right? That the Metatron that is reported to appear in the sky. The energy.
You mean the angel Metatron?
I'm talking about energy. I'm not talking about graphics and propaganda or political stuff. So the thing about Freemasonry is they adapted a whole lot of symbols from religion and Hermetic arts, and they confused them unbelievably, and they lost all of the knowledge up until about the 30th degree, even the 32nd degree. 32nd degree, you're told basically that everything you've learned is schmuck, and it is. It's a clown factory. Freemasonry, and I'm saying this to all the Freemasons, I'm sorry, but Freemasonry is a clown factory.
Yeah, it's a road to nowhere.
It is a clown factory. And it's only if you have the key knowledge that you can understand what you're being told and the dichotomy of what you're being told. But only the people who have the energy experiences will recognize the symbolism that it represents, right? So you get, like, say, the 2-headed eagle or Janus or whatever, you know, like that. So here we are. This is my head and these are my eyes. But when I soul travel and fly up 10,000 feet and look down, that's another set of eyes and another head. So I've got the microcosm view and I've got the macrocosm view. And the microcosm is represented by the number 5. Macrocosm is represented by the number 6. And it's known as the 6 and the 5. And that's what it's about, right? What they did was they tested people's spiritual integrity through soul travel. They also changed like copper and gold into the ormic state and gave it to people to level off the left and right hemisphere of the brains so that they could find out whether they're dealing with a spinner or a truly spiritual person. And then they would give them an initiate exercise to fly up, get 10,000 feet, look down onto the landscape, and uncover the mysteries of the landscape. And the landscape can't be changed, right? So the word Messiah in Egyptian means the holy crocodile. So Jesus of the Algarve did his 6-5, did his macrocosm, microcosm, soul travelled up, looked over the landscape of the Algarve, and saw that there were 2 holy crocodiles. So he built his villa at the place where the 2 holy crocodiles were either drinking from the springs or watching over. Hence Messiah. Not only that, Jesus of the Algarve's address, his physical geographical address was Christ, written in Old Aramaic with all the letters, phonetic letters put on top of each other.
Yeah, so in other words, initiation is really about an out-of-body experience and not all this convoluted nonsense that people spend years going through, which actually takes them nowhere. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's that as well, and you know, right at the end, right at the 30-second initiation, it's a test to see if you're a sociopath or not.
Exactly.
No, it is. It seriously is. There's a sociopath test at the end. Yeah? And I won't tell you whether, if you are a sociopath, you're advanced, or if you're not a sociopath, you don't advance, you know? You can find that out yourself.
Well, it's just a control system, and basically, so what you're saying is the real knowledge is kept secret.
Well, at the high levels, you know, the high levels are supposedly 33 degree. But in finding Jesus of England's grave, what I found was the other 13 levels or 13 steps. In Freemasonry, a degree of initiation is called a level or a step, right? A step, yeah? So most people go, oh yeah, 33 degrees is the top of Freemasonry. It's not. 46 degrees is, right? So I didn't know that at the time, but what I discovered in England was the other 13 steps of Freemasonry. And it's very, very simple. Very simple, and again, it's undeniable. From the time when Jesus died in England, let's say it's around 87 AD. From 87 AD to, let's say, 2000 AD, there was 2 meters of soil lodged on London through cosmic dust, pollution, whatever. The soil is now 2 meters higher, right? That is 13 steps.
Well, I have no idea whether it's 2 meters higher or not.
No,
Greg.
it is. It's known.
Okay.
Yeah. So you get the old temples and that, and it's 2 meters down, etc. So that was the 13 steps. The 13 steps of the illuminated degrees was the 13 steps down to Jesus' grave in London.
Okay.
Right.
So
13 extra steps. Right.
In your opinion, where is the location of Jesus' grave in London?
By the book. By the book, and it shows it. It shows it. It's all there. And again, it's codified in the buildings. The buildings actually, and the statues actually codify where Jesus is, including Cleopatra's Needle. See, Cleopatra's Needle resonates with Jesus of the Algarve's mausoleum and temple in the Algarve. And with Luxor, where they came from, and with the Luxor needle in Paris.
In London, it's actually on the Thames on the embankment, in an area near Embankment Tube Station.
That's the Cleopatra's Needle. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently they built that with 12 photographs of Britain's most attractive woman buried underneath it.
I have no idea about that, Greg. To expand on it.
Anyway, so what I'm introducing is, I actually haven't got a word for it, but it's, when you break the code, it's undeniable. It's in times, it's in distances, it's in objects resonating, It's in sacred geometry like Vesica Pisces, and it's in the soil building up over 2,000 years. So, you know, when you see it, it's undeniable. And when you hear the story of the two Jesuses, you recognize it in the myths and legends that we've been given. And one of the myths and legends that we've been given is King Arthur. Right? And, you know, it's absolutely fascinating legend. And what it is Prince Arthur pulls a sword from a stone. But Prince Arthur is pulling a sword from the Philosopher's Stone. So the concept is that Prince Arthur polishes the Philosopher's Stone so much and gets the knowledge that he can pull a sword from it. That is, yeah, out of the book. You know, yeah. So that's the sword. You pull the sword from the knowledge, so that the knowledge can cut like a blade.
Well, that's right. So these stories are mainly, it seems, allegorical.
There's about 3 different Arthurs, and they're sort of 200 years apart, and they all did little bits of things, and then you take the authors like Bede, etc., and they've all been discredited for writing and then backdating their works 400 to 800 years. No, because what happened was England's history was wiped out in 451 AD with the Catholic Church backing the Saxons to basically destroy all history of Jesus. But there's another way that it was codified, is that Emperor Constantine, when he was a civilian, he grew up in England, his mother was English, and then he went to Constantinople and became the emperor there, and he built the edicule there, which is supposed to be Jesus' edicule. And Emperor Constantine almost lived the life of Jesus in reverse. He went from England to Constantinople, and Jesus came from, you know, Jerusalem to England.
There's a theory that Constantine ended up in North America. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't know anything about that.
No,
it's but in terms of say Ralph Ellis's work,
you're talking about Ralph Ellis, who we had on the show.
So I'll give an introduction to the build-up to his theories, right? So Jesus of the Algarve and Jesus of England both studied the Egyptian and Babylonian mysteries in Alexandria and south at Philae, at the first cataract of the Nile at Aswan. Jesus went to the Algarve, one of them, and leading up to his place was a 10-kilometre long tunnel. And then he built a Roman-style villa with lots of hot, tepid, cold bathhouses. The Caesars wanted the occult knowledge of the kings and of the mystics in every place that they went to. And the negotiation for the Jesuses to save their lives was that they would initiate the Caesars in the occult knowledge that they had gained. So the Romans basically secretly escorted the Jesuses out of Nazareth and Jerusalem. So the Caesars would walk up this 10-kilometre tunnel to Jesus' place, and then from there they'd rest up and wash, lots of bathing, and then they would go 700 royal yards, which is 800 standard yards. 8 over 7 equals royal. So they would walk up 700 royal yards to the initiation place, which is actually the T in Christ, because there's a column cross there. That's the T in Christ in the address, the geographical address that was Christ. And the exchange for Jesus initiating the Caesars and the mysteries was, take my son as one of your own. Take my son and raise him as your own. So Jesus got his grandson received by the Roman emperor and adopted by the Roman emperor as his own, and raised to be the Caesar. And then Jesus' great-grandson was also adopted by a Caesar as his own and raised to be a Caesar. And these became Emperor Trajan and Emperor Hadrian. They were Jesus' grandson and great-grandson. And from that you get Hadrian's Wall, etc.
Well, that's very interesting, because we were talking about this Emperor Vespasian, and could Jesus have been an offspring, or was there an invention of Jesus through Vespasian?
Yeah, well, what the Caesars did is they tried, the Jesuses in the immediate lineage and the Caesars, tried various forms of a distraction, because Jesus was a prince, his royal lineage going back to Egypt and Babylon, and so were the Marys. So the Romans really wanted to protect that lineage, and they wanted to create all forms of distraction. And one of those distractions was creating the emperor of the Eastern Empire, Emperor Esus Manu.
Yes.
Yeah, which became, it sounds like Jesus Emmanuel or Jesus Manuel, right? So that was one form of distraction. And then the other form of distraction was having Jesus' grandson and great-grandson, and probably going down another 5 lineages of adopted Jesus' children, grandchildren, etc., to become Caesar. That went from AD 96 to AD 192, so for 96 years. So the Caesars, who were Jesus' grandson, were actually in control, and they were forming part of that distraction to take the focus away from them being Jesus' lineage, right? So if they've got a competing Caesar, they say, well, be, Aesus Manu. It's great. We love it. It's a good distraction. Keep it up.
Okay, so it's getting very confusing in some ways, because you're talking about really a plan to throw everything into kind of confusion and obscurity, so people can't find out about it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, it's self-protecting.
Yeah.
So he's apparently died in Jerusalem. So one goes to the Algarve and one goes to England, and they hide their identity. You don't walk around in another country and say, "Hi, I'm Jesus the dead guy." You come up with different names and different occupations. But the Bible does give codes to Jesus of the Algarve and Jesus of England. With Jesus of the Algarve, you've got walking on water, bathing of the feet, and turning water into wine, and appearing as a ghost.
Okay, so how does that fit into the Algarve?
They're all locations of where Jesus lived. Well, his site, there was a if you look at the Algarve around Faro, which is spelled F-A-R-O, but
Yes.
It actually means Pharaoh from Egypt. That's what it means. It's had many different spellings, many different interpretations, but it actually means Pharaoh of Egypt, right? So he lived inland from Faro, about 10 kilometers inland. And there was a river going up, and halfway up is a town called Consuelo, which means conception. And there's a tunnel that goes all the way up from Faro right to where he lived. And in 1954, a 9-year-old boy walked up through that tunnel, and there were still artifacts in that tunnel. And I would venture that the artifacts in that tunnel are the basis of Freemasonry.
Well, this really fits in with the importance of Portugal and its relationship with Great Britain, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's also coming through the darkness into the light.
Well, yeah, all this stuff is allegorical. I'm reading the Nag Hammadi scriptures, and really it seems to be the same story all the way through, apart from some very revealing bits of text which I've pulled out. But as far as the hidden king of England goes and the true lineage, how does that affect the story of Marcos Manoel?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, this does lead up to the true lineage of the true royal family. But I just wanted to explain how the Bible has recorded where Jesus lived, right, in the Algarve. Okay. The initiates would go up through this tunnel, but there was also a river going up to that tunnel, which has since dried up. And that river used to end in a port, an actual port, basically at the bottom of the garden of Jesus' place. And there was a Roman bridge going over it called the Marsh Hill Bridge, which refers to Marcy, John Marcy, which was Jesus' son's name. His firstborn son's name was John Marcy. And then there was a spring, a very lively spring that came down, and that fed a vineyard. So the water that came out of the spring watered the vineyard, and Jesus turned it into wine. He turned water into wine. Jesus owns a vineyard.
Is that where the bloodline of the vine comes from then?
Well, the vine is a code name. The vine lineage is a code name for the lineage from Jesus.
So the Merovingian vine, the bloodline that they're claiming, is that the true lineage then?
Well, Merovingian means men of the vine of the giants.
That's right.
Right. So Jesus was on that lineage, but he was also had a vineyard, right? So he made wine. The other thing is, walking into his water temple, you bathed your feet, which was 13 and one. The water level was 13 and 1/7 inches deep. And then if you look up John 13:1-7, it talks about bathing the feet. Right? So the measurement,
very interesting.
Is the code in the Bible, and that's why you have something pertinent and then a whole lot of gobbledygook in the Bible until they come up to the next number, which is pertinent, and then they say something interesting. Right? Now the other thing is, on the outside of the temple, he would have flames like on sticks on the outside of the temple. And then, so there's a temple, and then there's a gap of about 10 paces, and then there's the villa. And the entrance to the villa, that was where the disciples slept. So Jesus would go for his morning prayers in the temple just before dawn, and then come out. Morning prayers, morning contemplation. Can't really pray to yourself now, can you? And his shadowy reflection would reflect on the water and on the ceiling. From the flames onto him, onto the water, onto the ceiling. So an image of him would be coming across the ceiling, or woo, and the disciples would be there lying half awake, seeing Jesus' ghost.
Yeah, well, as I say earlier, it all seems to be allegorical, doesn't it?
Well, it's allegorical for very specific things that actually describe a location and a piece of architecture. And when you get there and see it, you go, aha, right, that's fantastic. I understand, right? And, you know, he hid very well. He was 10 kilometers inland. Not only that, the coast before him, the coast in front of him, used to be 6 kilometers away. And it's grown. It's, with earthquakes, it's risen up about 10 meters every 400 years. So about 40 meters. But the actual coast has grown out at least 4 kilometers. So you've got reasonably modern day fishing villages 2 kilometers inland. Huh? So that the ground is actually growing out. So when you look at the old Aramaic spelling of Christ and find its geography, you've got to disallow the new 4 to 6 kilometers of land that's grown up.
Okay, Greg. So
it's all codified and it's all there, and pictures of the Holy Grail as well, just to put the stamp on it.
Okay, yeah. Well,
I'm talking photographs of the Holy Grail. I'm not talking pictures or drawings. I'm talking photographs. 4 photographs of the Holy Grail.
Okay, so what is the Holy Grail?
Well, Holy Grail is lots of things. It's a whole new episode, but it's also a cup. And these photographs are of the cup.
Well, I think that's for simplistic minds, isn't it? They have to actually have it as some kind of object.
Well, not really, because there's carvings in it of the life symbol, the tree of life symbol.
It's very interesting that you mentioned the Merovingian bloodline, because when we were at Pena Castle, got some extremely interesting photographs of this creature, which is in a vine above the entrance to the castle, which no one's really allowed into this room. It's closed off to the public, and it's like this demon that's coming out of a vine. So I think that's a very interesting aspect, that you've got this. Is this misinformation of the men of the vine of the giants? So is this the biblical Anunnaki?
Yeah, the Anunnaki were giants from space who started up a lot of from them came the king lineage.
Yeah, it became the Nephilim.
Yeah, there's lots of names for it.
Nephilim, yeah.
And so basically, in that aspect, Christianity is a UFO cargo cult.
A lot of people will find that actually very hard to take, but in a way, I agree with that because it fits in with my particular line of research.
Well, you look at medieval paintings with UFOs in them. You look at the Archangel Michael, and he's standing with wings, and he's holding an anti-gravity disc. He's holding a UFO in his hand, and the Catholic Church reproduces them everywhere.
They do seem to have this superior knowledge that's hidden, and I've covered this quite a lot, and there does seem to be evidence of this bloodline. What fascinates me is who these people really are. So we're getting into a very fascinating subject here in the respect of this appears to be a group of people on this planet who are in control now, who've usurped a bloodline that you're saying is divine, and I believe it is. So how does this fit in now to the hidden King of England?
I'll give it to you in brief. The Rothschilds ran the European wars and the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon and Wellington, fighting on the French and the British sides, were both Rothschild agents. Napoleon lost, Wellington won. Homing pigeons left from Waterloo to bank with the contrary message saying that Napoleon had won, just in case there was a stray bird. Everyone at the stock market was told that Napoleon had won, cashed in all their stocks. And Nathan Mayer Rothschild bought up all the stocks at rock bottom prices, then released the true news that Wellington had won. And with that, he took over the Bank of England and virtually bankrupted the British royal family. And in exchange for funding the British royal family, he claimed breeding rights. So Princess Victoire Louise, which is Queen Victoria's mother, she was travelling to Switzerland, stopped by in France, and underwent a ceremony called the Merovingian Bestia Neptuni Procreation Tradition, aka threesome. And that was with Nathan Mayer Rothschild and Baron James Mayer Rothschild, who's the French Baron Rothschild, and it was his seed that took hold, and that resulted in Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria looks identical to Baron James Mayer Rothschild, French Baron Rothschild. So Queen Victoria was illegitimate, but she was still made queen. But before she became queen, she secretly married the second in line to the British throne, who is blind Prince George of Cumberland, and they married at Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy on Britain's Mother's Day, 9th of March 1834. And then about 57 days later, Queen Victoria gave birth in Carlisle Castle in England to Marcos Manoel, who was a legitimate firstborn from the first and second in line to the British throne, although Victoria was secretly illegitimate, but blind Prince George was legitimate. And then Marcos Manoel was shipped to Portugal, and Queen Victoria has Portuguese ancestry dating back to the Constable of Portugal in 1340. And Marcos Manoel was raised in Lisbon, And then when he was 16, he went back to live with his mother, Queen Victoria, on the Isle of Wight from the age of 16 to 21 or 22. And then he moved back to Lisbon and married, and the woman he married is very, very likely the principal female descendant of Jesus of the Algarve. And that's how the lineage was joined again with Jesus of England and Jesus of the Algarve, was with Marcos Manoel and his wife Anna Teresa, and their firstborn son Jose Marcos, who was born in 1857. And he was actually also the true King of England. And he knew it. He absolutely knew it.
So some people who watch this are going to ask, Greg, just to get this in here, it's quite important. So if Queen Victoria was illegitimate, why is Marcos Manoel legitimate?
Because the true kingship can come from blind Prince George of Cumberland, who was second in line to the throne, who was the father.
He was a real royal, that's what you're saying, yeah?
And he was also made the King of Hanover.
Yes.
What happened then is all of the official children of Queen Victoria were made ever more illegitimate. And the entire British royal family from King Edward VII have been illegitimate bastards. And a royal bastard is called a batard. And illegitimates who are in the position of queen or king and their family are called flatlie royal. And we've had a flatlie royal family for 160 years.
This is very interesting, Greg.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll just give you a brief rundown in the kingship. So Queen Victoria was 1837 to 1901. Her son, King Edward VII, was 1901 to 1910. He was sired by Baron Lionel Nathan Rothschild, who was the head of the central bank in London. And that was done while Queen Victoria was under the influence of Baron Danger, or scopolamine, and with Prince Albert holding Queen Victoria's hand while she was administered the Baron Danger. Right? And the banker Lionel Nathan Rothschild was having sex and procuring children with Queen Victoria on her most fertile days, and that resulted in 9 dull children. King Edward VII was considered retarded and mad, phrenologically insane. He was considered a madman. And his son was apparently King George V, who reigned from 1910 to 1936. However, King George V was actually sired by the person who became Tsar Alexander III. And he was known as Tsarevich Sasha. He had an older brother called Tsarevich Nicholas, or Grand Duke Nicholas II. And his elder brother was the runt. So he killed his elder brother and then had sex with his fiancée, or had sex with his fiancée's sister, who was Alexandra, Princess of Wales, and then killed his older brother, and then took the position as Tsar Alexander III of Russia. And if you have a look at the photos of King George V of England and Tsar Nicholas II, son of Tsar Alexander III, Tsar Nicholas II and George V are identical. They were first cousins anyway because their sisters, their mothers were sisters, but they had the same father. And that is proven because King Edward VII was away at the time of conception. He was then known as Prince of Wales, and he was taken from Denmark away for 30 days, 26 days, to Sweden, so that he could not possibly have been anywhere near Alexandra, Princess of Wales, at the time of the conception of King George V. And he was also, George V was also conceived in the Black Moon month, which meant that all the Russians and Scandinavians and Wiccans considered George V to be a true king. and that's why they killed George V's elder brother, or faked the death of George V's elder brother, Prince Eddie, and they did that through the Jack the Ripper murders.
I've actually heard that story being talked about recently.
Yeah.
So, really, what we're doing here, we're unveiling history here.
Yeah.
And it's going to come as a shock to quite a few people. But I think that what's very interesting is we go back to that filming we did in 2010.
Yeah.
When you were talking to the Queen's Guard. Now, there's something very intuitive about people in Britain sometimes.
Yeah.
That guy, when you said that the current British monarchy are fake, he said, you're probably right, instinctively.
Yeah, he did say it instinctively. I said they're fake and they're illegitimate. Yeah, and he said, you're probably right. And then I added something else, and he said, you're probably right. So he confirmed twice that the current Queen is a fake.
And that's very important in a way, because when you get people who have actually sworn allegiance to the Queen, which he had done, because he was in the Queen's Guards, he was working within the Metropolitan Police, but he was really part of the Queen's Guards.
Yeah.
For him to say that in public, all right, he may not have known he was being filmed, but to say it anyway, I think is very revealing. And that's what I find most fascinating, and I think people will find most fascinating about this story, because for some reason it resonates.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Okay, I appreciate that. I'll continue with the illegitimacy of the British royal family from Queen Victoria, blind Prince George of Cumberland. They gave birth to Marcos Manoel. That's the legitimate line. He was born in 1834 in England. Then they had, Queen Victoria was given Baron Dungar and conceived a child with Lionel Nathan Rothschild, and that was King Edward VII, who's illegitimate and mad. And then he officially sired King George V, who reigned 1910 to 36, but he didn't. George V was sired by Tsar Alexander III of Russia, and then George V sired George VI, who reigned from 1936 to 52. George VI was 1 IQ point above retarded, 67 IQ. He was knock-kneed, chain smoker, alcoholic, and no one wanted to marry him. No one.
Sounds actually, Greg, that sounds like the average British man.
Well, the only reason this charade has gone on for so long is the distraction of soccer. Really?
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true, because if people concentrated and were able to remember things, then this may have actually dawned on people a bit earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. So George VI was legitimate to George V, but he was retarded. So he had a child with purportedly Elizabeth Bell's Lion, but Elizabeth Bell's Lion was first engaged to Edward VIII, and Edward VIII wasn't crowned king, and he was in the position of king from January to December 1936, and then he abdicated. And in 1921, when he was about to become engaged to Elizabeth Bell's Lion, it was announced in the papers. The first thing he said to Elizabeth Bell's Lion was, "I'm going to abdicate." So a week later, Elizabeth Bell's Lion was engaged to the second brother, George, who became King George VI. But George VI was a chain-smoking alcoholic with knock-knees and a terrible stutter. And he kind of had like frog-like resemblance. He kind of looked like a frog. So Elizabeth Bell's Lion switched herself with her maid. And Elizabeth Bell's Lion's maid became engaged to the person who became George VI. Right? And Elizabeth Bell's Lion's maid and George VI got married in 1923 and conceived a child. And that was a son. And that son was epileptic, and they left it to die on the gurney, on the hospital bed. And then George VI was removed from the genetic gene pool of the royal family and replaced with another semi-royal who was also illegitimate. And that was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was the illegitimate son of King Edward VII, who was the illegitimate son of Queen Victoria. So Winston Churchill provided the sperm. There was no sex. Elizabeth Bal's maid didn't do sex until she got to New Zealand. So Elizabeth Bal's maid with Winston Churchill's sperm conceived Princess Elizabeth and conceived Princess Margaret in 1926 and 1930. And Princess Elizabeth, whom you know as Queen Elizabeth II, she was actually born above a pub. She was considered so low, she was born above a pub, above the Coach and Horses pub in Mayfair.
She's come a long way.
I know, it's a long con. And the first person to look down on her was the communist spy Anthony Blunt when he was 17, going, coo, coo. So Queen Elizabeth II is illegitimate. Lord Louis Mountbatten knew this, and he had a nephew without a kingdom called Prince Philip. And Lord Louis Mountbatten negotiated with King George VI and Elizabeth, his wife Elizabeth Bal's maid, to not reveal the secret in exchange for Prince Philip marrying Princess Elizabeth.
Well, that's very interesting.
So you've got an illegitimate Queen Elizabeth. And then she has a child, Charles, with Philip, and a child, Anne, with Philip. And then she has a child, Andrew, with Lord Porchester, her racing manager. And then she has a child, Edward, with her house secretary of the royal house, Lord Plunkett. So she's got 4 children. Queen Elizabeth II has 4 children to 3 different fathers. So she's, on the level of a State House mum.
Well, it does sound like it from what you've just said there. I mean, I don't doubt that they are illegitimate. It does make sense with what's happened to Britain.
Yeah. So when we were, well, basically, because Queen Elizabeth II is illegitimate, anyone who knows that knowledge goes up to Parliament and David Cameron and all the Prime Ministers and goes, your Queen's illegitimate. We won't expose that if you do this for us, i.e. massive immigration, change the colour of the entire nation, and join the EU, etc., etc. Totally compromised. So Britain is totally compromised because you have an illegitimate queen who is not a royal, right? Queen Elizabeth II is the daughter of a maid, right, and an illegitimate non-royal who was, his father was a mad half-royal,
That does make
it's
sense.
Insane. It's insane. Britain's monarchy is absolutely insane. And what they've done is they've said, okay, we're not going to release this secret for 200 years. And we'll call it the Shin, the Forbidden Secret, and that secret's going to go from 1812 to 2012. With basically the death of Mayor Amschel Rothschild, who was Nathan Mayer Rothschild's father. So that's how it was done. So the Forbidden Secret was allowed to come out in 2012, and I started work on it. I wrote some pre-stories in 2007 called How to Take Over the World, a Right Royal Con. And then I started writing The Hidden King of England from March 2010. And amazing amount of sabotage. Like, I could talk for 8 hours. I've actually done talks before on the amount of sabotage I've had. It's just phenomenal. But anyway, it took 4 years, and it's 5 volumes, and it reveals the whole lineage of the British and European royal families, and their origins in the Jesuses, and what the Jesuses did, and how all of the British and European royal families are now, or most of them, are illegitimate. And it's like we need a reset, and we've got the reset button, and that's the one of them is the Holy Grail, and the other is the knowledge of the 2 Jesuses. one of the biggest things in kingship is actually finding Jesus' grave, and I found 10 Jesus graves, because there's two Jesus. But
Well, the last you said in your book, quite rightly, you said that Jesus was an incredibly common name.
Well,
and that's very important, isn't it?
It was the fifth most common name. Jesus was the fifth most common name at that time, and Simon was the fourth. So it was easy to move around with that name. And Jesus is still a reasonably common name in Latin America and the Latin countries. It's not really a big deal. It's in the WASP countries that Jesus is considered, such a big name. The reason he survived is that they were so in tune, And when you see the overall picture of what the Jesus did, it's absolutely fantastic. The Jesus of England started common law. Greenwich Mean Time is done in Jesus of England's honour, which means he is everywhere, every place. He's your bearings, your north, your south, your east and your west. Because he's Greenwich Mean Time. He's the prime meridian. It was created off him. It was marked off him. It was actually marked off both Jesus, because there was a battle between King Louis XIV and the English over prime meridian. And that actually gives the codes of where Jesus was killed in London, off Greenwich Mean Time, off the prime meridian, off Greenwich. So then there's another dimension where you can't deny it when you see the codes. You've got a church steeple there, and it's exactly 5 miles, and you've got Greenwich Mean Time, it's 120 degrees. That means Trinovantium, and Trinovantium is an ancient name for London. And the other ancient name for London is Londinvium, and Londinvium means Lion Desposini Virgin Mary. So the lion children of the Virgin Mary, which included Jesus.
Well, that really explains the importance of England, and from what you're saying, the importance of Portugal.
Yeah, well, England and Portugal have the oldest treaty, the 1373 Treaty of Windsor, which I believe is your real surname, Windsor.
It's one of my father's middle names, actually.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
But that's
very interesting, Greg.
That's a taken name. And, before that it was Saxe, Coburg and Gotha, which was actually a fake name taken from Prince Albert, who wasn't a prince, and his surname wasn't Saxe, Coburg and Gotha. His name was Albert of Saxony, because he was illegitimate. Right? So the British took the most illegitimate semi-prince they could out of Germany and married him to Queen Victoria. And they changed his name, so when they changed his citizenship from German to British, it wasn't legal, and they married him under a fake name, so it wasn't a legal marriage, and Prince Albert sired none of Queen Victoria's children. And when Queen Victoria had 9 children, and the youngest one was 2.5 years old, it was only then that Albert was named Prince Consort Albert. And he never consorted, he died a virgin.
Well, historically, in a way, it does make sense.
At the age of 42, they killed him with pneumonia. They stuck him in Windsor Castle in December. He had a slight cold. They basically chained him to the bed, wouldn't let him out of bed, wouldn't let him out of the room in Windsor Castle, and then opened all the windows in winter. He basically froze to death.
Yeah, they're not known for their charitable actions, are they, really?
So Prince Albert was not the father of any of the royal children. All of the official 9 royal children of Queen Victoria were illegitimate. And they did, especially the youngest, Princess Beatrice, was Queen Victoria's secretary, and she got all of Queen Victoria's letters, rewrote all of them, and then burnt the originals, so that the entire history we get of Queen Victoria comes through her daughter, youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice, who was a complete battle axe, who was doing everything she could to remove any mention of Marcos Manoel, who was the legitimate royal.
Well, it does make sense because, as we know, we're told a version of history. And when we look at history properly, none of it makes sense, but all we have to look at is who benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yep.
So, Hidden King of England, where can we get the book?
The Hidden King of England, you can get it from thehiddenkingofengland.com, gregghallett.com, and theworldoftruth.net. And these books are, the highest standard of books used to be folio books, Folio. But now these books, The Hidden King of England, outstrip them in quality. You know, they're hardcover, yellow ribbon, really high quality paper, really high quality print, 700 colour photos with no bleed through. So we really had to go for basically the same printers that print money. So they're not cheap, but they hold the secrets to the freedom of the English people from a tyrannical royal family which is destroying England to cover up for their illegitimacy.
Well, that makes complete sense historically with what's happening to Britain at the moment.
That's disgusting.
It's been driven into complete debt slavery, and it's getting worse.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Crown, which is not the Crown, which is now the UN, they're going to steal all the property. So we have an outside force, which is the United Nations, which by their own admission is above all international law, acting as land pirates.
Yeah, land grabs. However, England joining the EU and the UN, etc., is not legal, because as soon as Queen Elizabeth II signed her first signature on the EU secession papers in 1972, she also signed her own abdication, and she's abdicated at least 9 times. And she's abdicated silently because she's never been queen, and she's not a royal. Queen Elizabeth II is not a royal. She's illegitimate. She's not a princess. She's never been crowned. She's never been a queen. Her crowning was like a black and white, blurred vision practice run without the stone of Scone, and very difficult to identify whether it was Elizabeth or not. And the entity that you know as Queen Elizabeth II is not on your coins and is not on your notes. That's a stand-in, I think her name's Mrs. Sanderson. So you've got this fictitious Queen Elizabeth II, totally fictitious, filling up a gap where the correct royal can stand in.
Exactly.
With, say, a correct royal mark, right? Like the Holy Grail would do it. And I hold a letter from Queen Victoria saying, assemble him claimant to the throne of the United Kingdom. I hold that letter. So that letter is actually enough to claim the kingship of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
It's very interesting, Greg, because we're talking about someone here who reads a teleprompter once a year. And that's about it, really. That's all she does.
Yeah. She's not the Queen. She's an actor. She's an actor in a compromised marriage who is part of a long lineage of fake and illegitimate children, to bankers, to racing managers, to basically the person who takes care of the house. And they've nailed it on the head with King Juan Carlos siring Prince William of England. And that was the reason King Juan Carlos was made to abdicate, as I exposed him as the father of Prince William. And King Juan Carlos was also the president of the Almanac de Gotha Society, which recorded the lineage of the royals, including Prince William. And King Juan Carlos failed to show that he was the father of Prince William. So first his daughter Christina was charged with embezzlement. He still didn't get the hint. And then he was also the honorary president of the Wildlife Foundation, WWF, and he went to Africa, shot some big game, and his leg was broken. And the leg represents kingship. So it was a broken kingship. So King Juan Carlos of Spain was made to abdicate on the information that I showed very definitely that with photos of Juan Carlos and Prince William at the same age, they were identical, definitely father and son. And Princess Diana was known to have 4 affairs with him in the 80s. And even Prince Charles was there. So Prince William is illegitimate. So they used the shooting game and the breaking of the leg, which was done purposefully, in Africa as cover for his reason to abdicate. But I was living 8 meters from the coast in the Algarve at the time, and at the same time that the King of Spain announced he was going to abdicate on the 29th of May 2014, the Portuguese Navy parked outside my sea cave for 25 minutes. As a salute, you know?
Yeah, you mean they moored out there? They couldn't really park, I suppose, because otherwise they'd probably got a ticket.
No, they didn't park or moor. They came in at 2 knots, stopped right outside my sea cave, and then stayed there for about 15 minutes, then moved about 80 meters to about 45 degrees, stopped again, and then they sent a Zodiac to my shore, and I had a 14-meter cliff face going down from where I lived. It was 8 meters to the shore, and then it's a vertical drop for 14 meters, and there's no way they could get up there. And then the Zodiac went, and the whole episode took about 35 minutes. And I had another witness, and that was exactly the same time that King Juan Carlos announced he was going to abdicate. And I predicted that 6 weeks beforehand. And I went down to the usual meeting place that night, and this guy said, Mike Stewart's his name, and he said, kudos to you. 6 weeks ago you predicted, I said, what's going to happen next? And you said the King of Spain's going to abdicate. And he did. He absolutely did.
Well, Greg, this is absolutely fascinating stuff.
And King Juan Carlos of Spain abdicated because he is the father of Prince William of England. Have a look at photos. It's on theworldoftruth.net. There's a video of it showing the photos, the comparisons, the faces, the ears, the nose, the cheeks, the jaw. It's this area here that you really got to look at, and they're identical.
Well, yeah. What I can say, without any shadow of doubt, he looks nothing like his brother.
And he looks nothing like his father, Prince Charles.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, and Prince Charles actually voluntarily abdicated on Guy Fawkes 2013 to his friends. He said, look, as soon as this charade is over, I just can't wait. I'm out. I'm just not interested in being king at all. It's just a charade.
He's always been a man who, it seems, is under pressure.
No, he's a runt. He's a royal runt. Prince Charles is the royal runt.
Yes, I suppose what you could say about him is he needs to grow some kind of balls, but he can't because of what you're saying.
No, he's actually been quite honourable in abdicating. Yeah. He's told his friends he's going to abdicate as soon as he can. Like, you know, if Queen Elizabeth died or abdicated, Charles would abdicate straight away. And, you know, Queen Elizabeth II is not Queen Elizabeth II. They call her Elizabeth II, but she's not. She's just Elizabeth Mountbatten. The UN calls her Elizabeth Mountbatten, and Mountbatten is the surname assigned to illegitimate royals.
It's really interesting, Greg, because the UN have completely taken over this country. Their change agents are all over it. We don't seem to have a monarchy because, as I said, she just reads a teleprompter once a year, and the rest of them just do photo ops, and they pretend to be in the military sometimes.
Yeah. Actors. They're just actors. They're actors waiting for the true king. So, yeah.
Well, I hope you can supply us with that, Greg.
I can.
Britain does need a bit of leadership at the moment.
Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, Greg. Well, it does make sense because, as we know, we're told a version of history. And when we look at history properly, none of it makes sense, but all we have to look at is who benefits. Hidden King of England, where can we get the book?
The Hidden King of England, you can get it from thehiddenkingofengland.com. GreggHallett.com, theworldoftruth.net. They're hardcover, yellow ribbon, really high quality paper, really high quality print, 700 colour photos with no bleed through, so we really had to go for basically the same printers that print money. So they're not cheap, but they hold the secrets to the freedom of the English people from a tyrannical royal family which is destroying England to cover up for their illegitimacy.